Hello, everyone. Welcome. Give me just a second. I'm trying to figure out either how to screen or hello and welcome. So this evening we have before you some esteemed panelists, who I'm going to introduce shortly. But before we begin, I wanted to tell you all a little bit about who we are. So Social Justice Research Institute Initiative, is putting on this event. The title of this event is Brown versus Board of Education at 70, the promise, potential, and pitfalls of Brown. I'll say that again, the promise, potential, and pitfalls of Brown. As you all may know, May 17th, 1954, it will be 70 years since Brown versus Board of Education. However, as many of you all, I will not be here on May 17th. So I figured we'll go ahead and do this momentous occasion and have this awesome panel prior to you all heading home for the break, so that we all could honor and commemorate that very important milestone in history. So I want to tell you a little bit about, I guess I should tell you who I am. Sorry, good evening, I am Dr. Tiffany Hollis. I'm an associate professor here at Coastal Carolina University in the Spadoni College of Education and Social Sciences. So welcome. The Social Justice Research Initiative promotes and integrates social justice research, experiential learning, and collaboration with community partners working for social change. The mission of SJRI is to strive for equal access to opportunities and rewards for all people. This is accomplished by developing a critical understanding of the root causes of social injustice and addressing those causes through innovative solutions for change. There are three core components that comprise the work that we do: education, research, and action. At this moment, I would like to recognize those members of the Social Justice Research Initiative: Dr. Hannah Liebreich, Dr. Horry, and of course, the chair of the sociology department, Dr. Bob Gincott, who without him and his funding and support, we would not be able to have this event. So this event concludes Ella Baker Week. Last week, we did several events commemorating Ella Baker, who was an activist and a sister who did some awesome things around political activism and social justice. And so again, this event will wrap that week up. So we're going to move right into the brief. Oh, sorry, I will be remiss if I did not mention our student assistant, Ms. Caitlin Poor. She's the social justice. And Caitlin is awesomely amazing. And I'm not just saying that because she's kind of dictating a lot of things tonight with the technology, which I know not too much of it. So, and coming up, we have the current outgoing president of the NAACP chapter here at Coastal Carolina University. She's going to read to us a brief blurb and overview of Brown versus Board of Education. Ms. Amaris Roberts. May 17th, 2024 marks the 70th anniversary of the 1954 Brown decision, in which the Supreme Court unanimously ruled in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. This decision marked a monumental shift in American history. That landmark ruling led to a dramatic decline in school segregation from the 1960s to the 1980s. The shift from segregation to more integrated schools significantly changed the course of Black children's lives, leading to greater educational attainment and better future economic outcomes. These benefits echoed across generations, improving the lives of children and grandchildren of Black students who attended integrated schools as a result of the Brown decision. But the legacy of Brown decision faces challenges in today's increasingly diverse society. Since the late 1900s, progress on addressing segregation has stalled. Racial and economic segregation has grown steadily in the past 35 years. Despite clear evidence of the benefits of racial and economic integration, school segregation remains one of the most pertinent school social problems of our time. We also had some interdisciplinary participation. So we had a couple of departments also write and share something. And one of the blurbs that came from Dr. Madison Cates in the Department of History, our assistant professor here in history, he wrote a blurb, and I want to share that with you. Although the implementation of Brown versus Board came slowly, the case itself was nonetheless a significant moment in American history. The unanimous ruling from our nation's highest court not only gave momentum to the emerging civil rights movement, more than that, the Brown decision affirmed for Black children, parents, and community leaders from Clarendon County, South Carolina, to Topeka, Kansas, that their tireless and costly struggles against injustice might not be in vain. And in that moment, at least, it seemed that their hopes to secure equality and justice for present and future generations might not be so far off. So we do want to say thank you to the History Department for contributing that blurb and assisting us with that on this evening. Thank you so very much. And I see Dr. Morehouse out there. Thank you so very much for coming. So the introduction of the moderator, Dr. Atiya Stokes-Brown. Kayla Childs, if you are present and in the audience, would you come up for me, ma'am?
Atiya Stokes-Brown is professor of political science at Coastal Carolina University, a dynamic leader with more than 15 years of experience working in higher education. Dr. Stokes-Brown has worked collaboratively in numerous capacities across college campuses. Demonstrating strong academic and administrative leadership and a deep passion for liberal arts education. Most recently, she provided campus-wide leadership regarding the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to the educational mission of the university, serving as vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion. In this role, she was responsible for advancing strategies and policies that advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as key parts of the institution's strategic plan. Her many responsibilities included developing and conducting CCU's first all-campus climate survey, developing and implementing CCU's first diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan. She developed bias response policy, advancing DEI professional development opportunities, and enhancing efforts to recruit and retain a diverse faculty and staff. She led the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and ran the division's administrative and faculty staff-facing office, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. She also provided administrative supervision for the Office of Intercultural and Inclusion Student Services and the Office of Accessibility and Disability Services. Prior to serving as Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at CCU, Dr. Stokes-Brown served as a tenured faculty member in the Department of Political Science at Bucknell University and held several administrative positions at the university, including Interim Associate Provost for Diversity Faculty Fellow for Diversity, Faculty Fellow in the Office of the Associate Provost for Diversity, and the Assistant Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Stokes-Brown has presented and participated in a number of diversity and multicultural workshops in organizations such as the Association of American Colleges and Universities, the Consortium for Faculty Diversity, and the Liberal Arts Diversity Offices, as well as various colleges and universities. Drawn to academia by the desire to give back and build inclusive communities, Dr. Stokes-Brown received her PhD in political science from the University of Maryland, College Park, and her master's in political science from Temple University. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa with bachelor degrees in politics and dance from Randolph-Macon Women's College, currently known as Randolph College. She is also a graduate of several competitive leadership programs, including the Penn State Center for the Study of Higher Education Academic Leadership Academy, the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, Standards of Professional Practice Institute, and Higher Education Resource Services. Dr. Stokes-Brown teaching interests include American politics, racial/ethnic minority political behavior, Latino politics, women in politics, campaigns and elections, and congressional state politics. She has more than 15 publications broadly centered on the political incorporation of women and racial ethnic groups in the American political system and issues of representation. She is author of The Politics of Race in Latino Communities, Walking the Color Line, and her work has appeared in several peer-reviewed journals, including the Journal of Politics, American Politics Research, Politics and Policy, the Journal of Elections, Public Opinion and Parties, Social Science Quarterly, National Political Science Review, and the Political Research Quarterly. She is also the author of several peer-reviewed book chapters. A native of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and a graduate of the Baldwin School in Bryn Mawr, PA, Dr. Stokes-Brown resides in Myrtle Beach with her family.
So Dr. Stokes-Brown will be our moderator for this evening. After hearing all of that awesomeness, you all see why she was chosen and invited to do, for anointed and appointed for such a thing, such a position tonight to be our moderator, correct? Right. So I am going to, Dr. Stokes-Brown. So here is what happened. I just have to finish putting together some of the bio pieces of some of our panelists, because I didn't want to leave out some of their awesomeness. If you all don't know, in front of you, you have gems and treasures of this community, of the Grand Strand in general, and of the Southeast region, period, right? And so I didn't want to leave too much out. So I wanted to, before I begin, that I wanted to pay homage to the five Blacks who led the way to Conway High School integration, and then we're going to move into letting Dr. Stokes-Brown introduce each panelist as well. And you'll hear some of those panelists are also part of the first five that integrated Conway High School. So you have Mr. Michael Avant, Michael Hughes, Dr. Veronica Gerald, Dr. Preston McEver Floyd, and Laverne Owens, who has since transitioned to be with the ancestors. So maybe take a minute to just pay homage to Mr. Laverne Owens, who is currently transitioning with the ancestors. Thank you all. Again, just wanted to certainly pay homage to those who have paved the way here in the area. And you'll hear their many stories that they'll share with you momentarily.
There we go.
Is it on?
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you all for being here. It's fantastic to be in this space with you all. It is just wonderful to be able to come together, recognizing the importance of this extremely important case, but also recognizing that there is so much more work to be done. I'll just share with you really quickly. Again, there's been a lot that's already been said. And one thing I want to just highlight is that there is indeed a local connection to the case of Brown versus Board of Education. Understanding that the case of Briggs et al. Versus Elliott et al. Took place here in the state of South Carolina. That is a very important case because it's actually the very first case that sets up the argument for dismantling separate but equal. It's important to know that the parents, the African-American parents in Clarendon County, interestingly enough, really were advocating only for their children to be able to have transportation to the schools, right? Understanding that there was just so much disparity, they simply were advocating and asking for their children to be able to have access to the schools. But it was members of the community, particularly Reverend Joseph Armstrong Delane, who then began to work with local members of the NAACP, said, no, we need to make this a broader request, right? And not just a request, a demand. We really need to do the work to begin to dismantle separate but equal. And the NAACP had been doing that work since 1936. So this case, which started as a simple request for access to buses, became part of Brown versus Board of Education. In fact, Brown versus Board of Education includes 5 different cases from 5 different states: Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, and Washington, D.C. And it is indeed an opportunity here to be able to talk to individuals who lived through that experience and can speak to us today about the success, but also the downfalls, as well as their existing challenges regarding the dismantling of separate but equal. What I would like to do is I'm going to ask a question of each panelist moving down the line, and in doing so, it'll give each of them an opportunity to tell us a little bit about themselves. So in their own voice, they'll be able to share their bio, share what they want you to know about them and how they see themselves as part of this experience. But that first question that will lead you to the opportunity to share about yourself is simply this. How did you come to know about this case? How did you come to know about Brown versus Board of Education, and what led you to be part of this experience? So with that, I will pass the mic down. Okay, you can do that. That's fine. However you'd like to start.
Thank you. I was thinking when you asked the question, the first time that I heard of this had to be probably I was about 15. I was very curious and I was a strong reader as a child growing up. And I had read about the Supreme Court and that it had made a decision that related to a dismantling of segregation. I found that interesting, so I paid attention because you really can't dismantle things that are inside of people. And so I wanted to pay attention to and observe just how this case was going to turn out. Because at the time, it occurred in 1954, but at the time when I heard about it, I was in a sophomore, maybe a freshman in high school. And my question was, why are we still segregated? And so I addressed the question to my mother, and mother said, but things are slow when it comes to us. And it just was one of those sentences that I put in my head to remember one day. So to answer your question, I heard about it when I was maybe 14 or 15. And I realized that the Supreme Court was trying to do something to change people inside. And so I started observing how that works. How can you make a law that changes someone's heart? So I started my research in my head, just observing things and paying attention. And I don't know whether we're gonna get to this in the next question, about actually going over the timeline. Do you want to bring that back later and just deal with it? Yes.
Yeah, you can answer, you can do that now, and also please make sure you introduce yourself
Oh,
so that we know who you are and how, again, that knowledge that you developed led you to.
well, I'm Veronica Gerald Floyd. Lots of names, but when I grew up in Conway, I was Veronica Gerald, and the only Veronica in the whole high school, the whole county. Anyone in my generation will say that they didn't know but one Veronica, or maybe a couple. So I had to deal with a very different name, and I had to deal with understanding the kinds of things that were going with that were taking place around me. I didn't really see it because there's something about growing up in a segregated community. And we developed our own laws, our own ways of action. I lived in a spot in my neighborhood. Everyone had to come to my neighborhood every day because I lived across from the colored school. And it was the largest one in Horry County, Whittemore High School. So everyone came to Whittemore from all over the county, Little River, Bucksport, Cool Spring, just wherever you live within this area, Whittemore was usually your destination. And so I was really surrounded by a community. Today, the kids are referring to it as a village, and it really was. My experience growing up in that community created a cocoon, if you will. My most fearful time, and I shared this before with another audience, my most fearful time was looking at the television, at the news outside of that village. And I saw the hoses and the dogs and the hatred and segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever rant that they had in Alabama. And so there was a doubleness in my life wherein on the one side I saw the 6 o'clock news, and on the other side I had this warm village, these people who loved me and cared for me and protected me. So at the time that I learned about Brown versus the Board of Education, I wanted to give that scenario because it's good to look at it in context. What was I doing at 14 and 15? What was I feeling? I lived in a community where everyone had to come to that community. There was nowhere around. The school, the club, the church, the only African American store that you could buy stuff. I think it was the only one. Right station. I had a lady behind me that sold had a little store, so you really didn't have to do a whole lot, but just breathe. So I at 14, when I heard about Brown, that was my mindset. And I'll stop there.
Hey, everybody. I am Mary Cookie Canty Goings from Myrtle Beach. And I want to say something before I share. I really do have more clothes. Well, then I'm sorry, I was like, so real. Never paid attention to the flyer on Facebook and going around. I was like, okay. But anyway, this is my power talk. But I am a true native of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, born and bred. 99.9%. My birth occurred at Conway Hospital, March 8th. Because I couldn't be born at Ocean View Memorial Hospital, which was up on 82nd Avenue in Myrtle Beach, because of segregation. So it made sense, well, it didn't make sense, but it was okay as far as I know, because my family, my grandfather's, my mother's father, my mother is Mary C. Canty, Mary Catherine Brantley Canty. So the Brantleys, the Falks, the Williams, the Spains, all of them, and there's thousands and thousands of them. So I said Saturday night, y'all better not talk about me in Conway or Horry County, because you never know in whose presence you'll be, because they are my relatives. So I am here tonight to share a little bit of my experience when appropriate and when asked. But I also want you guys to know that I represent my oldest sister, Martha Elizabeth Dimples Canty Gore, who was a classmate
That's 68.
at Whittemore High School, who on January 29th, 1965, was one of the first 4 to integrate Myrtle Beach High School. So she left Whittemore second semester of 1965 and was one of the 4 to integrate Myrtle Beach High School. In August of 1968, I would be one of 6 children to integrate the Myrtle Heights Elementary School in Myrtle Beach. So my experience was the same yet different, because I am the baby of the bunch. I'm the youngest tonight. So I realized that I have stood on their shoulders, if not their backs. When I first learned of Brown versus Board, I just knew there were lots and lots of meetings. And some of you know my mom or know her work. She was always at a meeting. But during that time, I mean, I was young, I was only like 4 or 5, but I just kind of remember the hustle, the bustle, just lots of meetings. But it really wasn't until probably I was about 12 or 13 that I understood. One of the gentlemen or the leaders of our community was Mr. Henry Reagan, who would be an administrator at Carver School and then at Myrtle Beach Junior High for many, many years. And I just remember at church, they would always, that was the hub for the African American community, where you got your information, all the meetings were held, whether it be social or political. The church was the most significant place other than home. And so I just remember them standing up all the time, talking about what was gonna happen and you know, what we could expect. So I would say around about maybe 12, 13 when I heard about it, but it wasn't until much later in my adult life that I truly understood what happened why it happened, and how my family, these families, how South Carolina was right in the middle or right at the lead, at the forefront of everything that happened and took place. And so for me, you know, when children are younger, they're, you know, so impressionable. And the younger you start teaching them, the easier, you know, it becomes. So the experience was less traumatic for me than it was for them. And it was my older sister. I integrated third grade. And then my sister and these guys, 10, my sister was a sophomore, but 11th grade, so they were much older. So again, my experience was very, very different. A lot alike, but quite different because I was so young, I believe.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Reverend Cheryl Moore Adamson, and I am from Conway. I graduated from Conway High School in 1970. Dr. Stokes-Brown, your question is very intriguing because until now, I've never been asked, when did you learn about Brown v. Board? I was 6 years old in 1958 when I entered Whittemore Elementary School. And we all experienced Whittemore Elementary School, as Veronica describes it, as a cocoon. We were, as it were, on an island of safety, security, love. We were just surrounded by people who were concerned about us as little children, who knew what we had to face outside of that world, and who wanted the very best for us and provided the very best for us. The teachers that we had at Whittemore Elementary School were persons who in other circumstances could have been lawyers, doctors, professors, dentists, accountants, you name it. But because they were stifled in their professional development, they were relegated to only being teachers. So we got the best of the intellects of our community. Highly capable people, knowing what we had to face. So I cannot tell you when I learned about Brown versus Board of Education, but I'll simply use this as an example. I decided that I was going to the University of South Carolina when I was in the 8th grade. I applied to 2 colleges, and that was USC and Clemson as a senior in high school. But in the 8th grade, it made perfect sense to me that since the University of South Carolina was the premier university in the state, and my parents paid taxes, that was the school that I was going to. That was all. And it did not have to do with a recognition of what Brown versus Board of Education was all about.
Thank you. I usually begin my talks with my favorite poem because it's symbolic of how I see life. I've known rivers. I've known rivers as ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I saw the Nile and raised pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi as Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I watched its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. my soul has grown deep like rivers. I'm Preston McEver Floyd. The distinct thing about my name is I was born Preston Floyd, but I always thought that I should carry both families' bloodlines. So in 1982, I had my name changed to Preston McEver Floyd. As a matter of fact, I have the distinction of being the first person hyphenated name in Conway, South Carolina. Probably another. I grew up in the home of the first African-American policeman in the state of South Carolina. My father was on the police force here in Conway. He was on 3 years before I was born. He went on in 1947, and he stayed on to 1975. So I didn't realize it at the time, but as I have reflected on my life, as I look back at that river that has brought me to this place, I realized that in some ways my life was unique. Now, indeed, as my colleagues have said, we had sheltered lives in a lot of ways. Now, as to Brown versus the board, I didn't know of it, but I remember when I went to elementary school in 1956, that there was talk about the schools being integrated. And I really prefer to use desegregated because the schools have still not been integrated and things are being done to stop them from being integrated. Integration to me means that all the stakeholders are represented and their cultures and contributions are appreciated. And that has not happened. We've come close to it from time to time. And now with all of the kind of new legislation that's out to ban books, to remove diversity, equity, and inclusion, we do not intend, or someone does not intend to have integrated schools. Board, Brown versus Board, I didn't really come to know about it until like everyone else around teenage years. And the significance of it is still going on, it's still being revealed. It's interesting that it happened a long time ago, but it's still being revealed what it can mean. One of the interesting things so often about Supreme Court decisions is I know I grew up being naive to think that, well, once the decision passed and things would immediately change. Well, what we often, or what I did not realize at the time, was the significance of resistance. And to realize that there was not a political nor moral infrastructure to make these things happen as they should have many years before. Brown versus Board, 1954. Well, in 1955, another act came up as an appendage, as it were, to that. And it was said that these things should be done with all deliberate speed. Well, they meant fast. The schools across the nation, and particularly in the South, saw that as deliberate speed. So that various things happened. I do remember this. Many churches, many white churches built tremendous education plaques on their campuses. And that was to have private schools so that the white children would not have to go to desegregated schools. There were places in Virginia where the school systems were shut down due to prevent immigration. And recently, thanks to Facebook, I had a young woman, I didn't know her in high school, but she texted me one night and she was ultimately in tears. I could tell she was. She said, "I was so sorry I didn't speak to you in high school." I didn't know that. And she said what it was, that it was like her junior year and she didn't want to leave the school. But her father told her that he wanted them out of that school if African Americans were going to be going. And the only way they could convince him that they could stay was that if they promised not to speak to any Black children. Also, with my father being a policeman and my dear mentor, Dr. George Lovell, I was told that the word was that should Black children enter the white schools, blood would run in the streets of Conway. But I am delighted to be able to tell you that didn't happen. Because there were people in the community, both Black and white, who worked to make sure that that did not happen. And so there was never that. Now, I don't know about my colleagues, I never had any real bad experience, but Veronica's told me I wear rose-colored glasses. So when I put on my love glasses, I don't see haters. So, but I've heard one person using the N-word not toward me, but in the hallway. So it was supposed to be offensive to me. But of course, that didn't relate to me, and I'm sorry, I've always been this way. Things that I don't relate to me, I don't really hear them. To this day, I don't. And so I'm not necessarily a good representative for the cause. But I do have my own unique experiences. And I'll stop there.
Well, I think that's a wonderful segue to the next kind of question that I had, and you all have mentioned it in some ways, but I mean, when you think about what's happening contemporarily in terms of trying to take knowledge out of schools, you know, one thing I teach about in my class is about Little Rock, Arkansas, right? That is something that is known and hopefully still being taught in terms of the resistance to desegregation in the schools, and how, again, you have in that political context a governor resisting, right, and President Eisenhower having to essentially take control of the National Guard to allow the students in. And so I think it's interesting to note that in this moment, while we are actually working in some places to take history out of schools, right, and so that people are not aware of the past, we have this wonderful panel here where we have people who have lived through this experience, and they can continue the process of education in a moment where people are trying to strip us of that knowledge. So with that context, I would like to know, and I, you know, again, with a heart of, you know, vulnerability and thanks and gratitude, I would love for you to be able to share a little bit about maybe some of the challenges, some of the joys that you experienced as you saw the impact of Brown infiltrate your communities, and do that in a way knowing that we are in a moment where there are people actively trying to keep people from knowing your experiences, from knowing the work that you did that would allow the students here today to have the experiences that they're having right now.
I'm not sure I got the top part of it.
So, sorry, that was a lot there. So basically, I would love for you just to talk about your experiences. What were some of the challenges? What were some of the joys? You know, we hear in history, there was resistance, right? And we can have this sort of textbook kind of framework of, okay, there was resistance, but you have lived through it. You've had experiences. And I was hoping that you could just illuminate a little bit more if there's something that you think history has left out, that students don't know and should know, and not just students, but anyone who's here, that they should know and don't know. That is important in this moment, especially as we are facing challenge. I'm hoping that you would share that with us today.
Okay, that is a very good question. One of the things that we have to realize is that we became the generation who would be first in several things. We didn't set out to do that, but people that work, say, with Thurgood Marshall, with and with the South Carolina groups, with the dogs, and what they did in order to try to affect segregation was to show the disadvantages of it. And so one of the things that I realized is that in doing so, my generation became the generation that would open the doors. And it didn't really occur to me as I was opening doors that I would become the first African-American woman to graduate from Conway High. That I would become the first African-American to be a junior marshal at Conway High. Didn't see that as the effort while we were trying to do it, but when you look back at it, they're first all across this panel and all in this generation that was part of this push, 15, 20 years that it took Brown versus the Board of Education to actually go into effect. For instance, I had been a part of the Whittemore regime, if you would call it, because that's what it was. We were on the that side of town, the west side of town. We had the high school and the elementary school right next to it. You had the teachers in your church, you had the teachers in the neighborhood. You couldn't get around Whittemore. So when I became 15, they needed to experiment. I don't know, Cheryl and Preston, whether that's the word you think that it was, but they needed to experiment by sending some students ahead of the Brown versus Brown move. So I was a part of that. Preston and I were, and as you read earlier, the other three people that were part of that, we went to Conway High. And they were boys, and I was the one girl. So I had a different story than they had. I had the stories of going to PE classes and not being chosen on a team. I was the best.
Well, I had one too. And because I couldn't.
That's the worst. Yeah, but you know, you would rather cut your hair off than be in PE class and the teacher says, well, we're gonna play baseball, softball today. Pick your team. You're like, please, must I go through this? So they're like, I want Janice, I want this, I want Betty, I want Mary. I would be the one left on the bench. And then back then we had to dress out for PE, a whole outfit. I don't know how, well, this light is keeping me from reading the audience. So I don't know what your age groups are, because you look faceless from here.
There you go. There you go.
You can see us, because we can tell. But anyway, my whole point was, what to do when you go into a situation that you have seen on the 6 o'clock news, because in your world, except for people as was mentioned earlier, Conway, you could go on Friday to A&P and the African Americans and whites were talking like they were the best of friends. They would know our names. Hello, Mary. Hello. What grade are you in now? So we had a community in Conway. We just had tradition. And what we were up against with Brown versus Board of Education is, how do you break down tradition? I didn't see that until I started studying in history. And I began to see what was going on, that I don't know whether Preston and I both went to Emory was at Emory at the same time, and we would come and share stories, but I had one history professor who had written a book, and in the book, he taught the book in class. And so in the book, he says Southern honor was the most valuable part of the South because tradition set the tone. Then you ask yourself, what happens when a group comes to break the tradition? And that's what happened to us at Conway High. We were breaking the tradition. When I mentioned I was the first junior marshal, I had to knock someone off because when my average came from Whittemore, it knocked somebody off the list. So Michael Avon and Avan and I became the first junior marshals, and that was big, huge. And it was the graduation, the baccalaureate, the part of the service that involved the junior marshals was held in all white neighborhoods of Conway, all white, humongous church. And my mother and I, and Michael Avan and his parents, we were there. And everyone there, you could see in their faces, my daughter could have been a junior marshal had you not been here. And so I had my little white dress on, my mother spent all week making it. And I had my little white dress on, and I'm sitting there, and everyone who came in that church, seeing me on that row as a junior marshal, you could see in their face that Brown versus Board of Education did not legislate the holiday. So I'm sorry, no one yelled or called me names or anything, but I could see that I had messed with tradition a little bit. And I'll pick up on this. I have some other, you were asking earlier, what were some experiences, and that could go along, so I'm gonna.
Again, a little, it's just somewhat different experience because of age, and I was so much younger, but of a village. And I grew up in Harlem and not New York. Everybody knew everybody. If there was a need, you didn't have to wait until your mom or your grandmother, came home. It was a given. And so our school was Carver School. But let me go back a little bit. Before Carver School, there was the Myrtle Beach Colored School, which existed from 1932 to 1953. Prior to that, there was no school for African-American children, for Black children in Myrtle Beach. So they were taught in the churches. Mount Olive AME Church, and then later St. Negro Baptist Church. The school, which when they did the research, which is now a museum, and I'll put a plug in for that later. They originally thought it was a Rosenwald school, but when they went to do the research, they realized that it was not. Built by Julius Rosenwald, who at the time was the CEO of Sears and Roebuck, who believed that all children, including African-American children, deserved an education, that they had a right to an education. So George Washington Carver hooked up with this gentleman and decided to build schools, salaries, and materials for African-American children. I thought initially just in the South, but it was throughout the United States. So prior to the school being built, they were taught in the two churches. The parents, the grandparents, the community built the Myrtle Beach Colored School. In order to be deemed Rosenwald, you had to use his money, but they didn't use his money. And so from 1932 to 1953, Myrtle Beach Colored School existed. It closed in 1953. Carver School opened in 1954. I attended kindergarten, first and second grade at Carver School. I knew every teacher. We knew every staff member. We knew the bookkeepers, the nurse, the cafeteria workers, the janitor, the custodians, because everybody was a part of the village. Everybody lived in the neighborhood. Everybody. We walked to school. What I did learn and what I remember most, Dr. Stokes-Brown, is that there was a sense of caring. There was a sense of expectation that I haven't experienced since. They knew that was Cookie. They knew that was Toot's daughter. They knew she was on the choir. Everything there was to know, they knew. So there was not a whole lot of misbehaving and inappropriate behavior because you were chastised there. On the way home, if somebody, and it was amazing to me, how did they know stuff? They didn't have cell phones. They did not know. My cousins, my big cousins, pushed me up, forced me to take a pair of Mother Louise and Deacon Joe White's, the street that's named for this gentleman, take a pear off his tree. And we all shared, passing it around. COVID, all that crazy stuff, we didn't know any better. But everybody passed it around and everybody got a bite. Well, when I hit Canal Street and on Denison Avenue, oh my goodness. Come here, gal. What you doing taking a pear off Mother White and Deacon Joe White's tree? How do you know that? You weren't even there. But there was this sense of, I'm responsible for you. So you got chastised then. And Lord, when my mama came home, you got it again. Because they cared, because they loved us, and they knew what could potentially be outside of the village. But we were taught Black history, our history, was taught mostly at church. In my home, yes, because my mom was pretty much an activist who loved all people. But we were taught, but we got a lot of our extra teaching, other than school, other than home, at church. And so the history makers and the shakers, we were aware of. But the one thing I want to share as far as my experience is concerned. So my mother and I are walking hand in hand up the sidewalk at Myrtle Heights, which later became Myrtle Beach Elementary School. And the principal at that time was Mr. Keith Cribb. So he walked down the sidewalk and met us and escorted us in. My first reading group was the second to the lowest. And I was like, so I'm in third grade. I've already done this stuff. I did this like in first grade, maybe first part of second grade, but I already know this. And sure enough, it was recognized. They moved me to the second to the highest. This is not challenging, but okay, I'll be here and I'll do it. And it wasn't very much longer before I was moved to the highest level. My point is, at Carver School, we did have the best of the best. And they saw to it that no child was left behind. And if there was a struggle, you stayed and you got extra. But you got it within the village, but you also got it at church everywhere you turned because there was an expectation. I wasn't liking anything academically. And on my sister's behalf, when they got to Myrtle Beach High School, they were equally as prepared, in many cases, more than. And so, what do we do to teach and to share? This is a part of it. And not just, I'm finding that not just for audiences and groups outside, but many African-American children don't know the story and don't know the history. They just think they've been able to ride the bus and drink at the same water fountain. I mean, I see it in my own family, they really do. And so each of us, we have a responsibility to teach and to share and to make them aware. Because Preston's right, there are efforts already underway to go back. I remember in 1970 when we all went back, which was the first year integration in Horry County and mandated, quote unquote. But in 1970, so everybody who was in 5th and 6th grade, we all came back to Carver School, which they changed the name to Central Elementary. That's when the first private school in Myrtle Beach opened up, Coastal Academy. 1970. So we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility because there are efforts to create more or bigger private schools. And I'll say this not a part of the question, but I'm going to say because what I'm seeing is we're regressing to a time where, okay, maybe they didn't, some, not all, initially didn't want us to come together. But we need to get over it, and we need to get over it fast because the world is brown. A few years ago, we were saying it's becoming brown. The world is brown. We were created and designed to coexist and live together.
Well, among the stories that I have, of course, center around how we got to be at Conway High School. And in 1966, then I suppose 1965, we all got these letters that said that we had freedom of choice. That's what they called it, for people to be able to choose what school they wanted to go to. So of course, there were some African-American families who chose to allow their children to go to the white school. So there were those among us, Preston and Veronica, and the other three were juniors, and I was in the 9th grade.
Seniority
You know,
has its privilege.
Listen, I told your daughter how old you were one time, and I said, don't tell her you heard it from me.
They know.
Yeah. I know. You didn't hear it from me, but she's 2 years older than me, and I'm, yeah. So anyway, with freedom of choice, we were able to go to Conway High School. The first day that I arrived with my parents, who were school teachers, they drove me over. We went to the front door of the formidable Conway High School. And I did not know that day that the front steps of the high school was the purview of the football team. So as I'm 5 feet tall now because I've lost 2 inches, but I would imagine I was probably 4'6" as a freshman walking up to Conway High School with my bobby socks on. And there are 4 rows of big white boys standing at the front door. Did not know that people didn't enter the school through the front door. Everyone, the car riders and the bus riders, came through the back. It was not until we got right up on them that those big boys parted to let me and my parents walk through. And that began the saga of my 4 years of being in class with no other Black person in any class that I had, save one period of 1 year. So following in their footsteps, I became the first Black commencement speaker at Conway High School. My mother tells a story that perhaps I should have been valedictorian, but you know, they had to be so maneuvered. But I became the first Black person from Horry County to go to the University of South Carolina. I'm talking 1970. So the significance of what we're sharing with you is Don't we look healthy and robust? What we are talking about is things that have occurred in our lifetime. We're not talking about 100 years ago. We are talking about 50, 54, 56 years ago in the history of our nation. A part of that slow walk to integration or desegregation was the freedom of choice. And of course, our schools were not and are not integrated. And when we talk about the promise of Brown versus Board of Education, what we were looking forward to was equality of opportunity. We were looking forward to equal facilities. We were looking forward to teacher salaries being equal. My mom and dad made $325 a month, I think, as food teachers. And I must say that my mother was the first Black teacher to go to a predominantly white school. She went part-time, half a day at Conway Junior High. And quick story is the teachers got together and gave her a room that was away from view. And it's just been in the last 5 years that it occurred to her that those teachers were trying to protect her from potential snipers. And just like with you in the reverse, when she got there, they gave her the smartest youngins they had. To show, yeah, to prove that
Her inability.
no, to prove how smart they were. Prove how smart they were. And then the next year they gave her a little lower, and then a little lower, and then a little lower because of her abilities to teach children. But they had to prove to her how smart children were. But what she did to help with the integration of the classes at Conway Junior High, the principal asked her, Ms. Moore, what should we do? She said, give me 20 of your best children and I give you 20 of my best children, 10 of my best children, and we'll put them together. And she said to the Black children, and don't you make me shave. And they did not make her shave. They did excellently.
I consider us, in particular Veronica, the first generation of Dr. King's dream. And let me tell you why. Dr. King was assassinated April 4th, 1968. 1 month later, we graduated from Conway High School. So we were indeed the first generation of his dream. And I take that very seriously. About 30 years ago, I never would speak on panels such as this. And on panels in regard to racism, et cetera, because I was very disappointed with things that I thought should have been no longer necessary to speak of at this point in my life. But that had to do with my misunderstanding of time. We think of time as moving linearly. Well, it does not. And my physics people in here know this. In a sense, we create time, but you know about making 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. So time is not linear, because if it were linear, we wouldn't be having this panel. But time moves back and forth. And so that was I came to that realization that no, time is not moving forward, so no, things aren't going to necessarily be as you think they should be. The other thing is this: resistance. Resistance is a natural force in the universe. Planes are able to fly because of resistance. And the point I'm making is this: don't be perturbed or put off because of resistance. Resistance help us to fly. And I know certainly from my personal life. Now at Conway High, we rode the bus, but we lived in town, but we would ride the bus to school. And most of the children on the buses were poor white sharecroppers' children. And the only time we would see them would be in the mornings and in the afternoons. Why do you suppose? Not you. Why do you suppose? Anybody has an idea? Why do you suppose we didn't see them except in the morning and in the afternoon? And at work? No, they weren't in our classes. We were in the top classes, the advanced classes, so we didn't see them. I heard Veronica chuckle because I know she remembers with she and Cheryl. We'd get on the bus in the afternoon, and the bus, all the seats would be taken. And so they didn't want anybody black to sit next to them, and there were no seats for my dear sisters. So I go sit beside somebody, and they jump up, and there would be seats for them. Another thing is this: what is this building we are in?
Wow.
Do you know anything about the Wall building and why it's named the Wall? Yes. Larry Bill will tell you. Well,
Mr. Wall, was, came here in Horry County probably with about $100 in his pocket. Long story short, ended up being on
Federal Reserve Bank.
Federal Reserve Bank Board. Yeah, it was Cash Card
But I'm sorry.
As I babysitted his grandchildren for 75 cents a pop.
Okay.
Yeah, Craig Wall.
Right. Well, the point I'm making, he was, of course, ended up being one of the wealthiest people, not only in this county, in the Southeast region. Well, one of my best friends in high school was his baby daughter. These were my friends. And so it's real interesting that you have these stories that you don't hear about. And we remained friends until her death. When I hate to talk about her business, but she married one of the richest men. She married a man who was vice president of Merrill Lynch companies. But his family was a shipping company. And the word is that their fleet was second only to Arionex's. And till death, we remain friends. So these are the stories that you don't hear. And this is why the stories are never just one thing. Life is not that way. We're not going to hear those stories because people want to hear the bad stories. Okay? And I've been first some of everything all of my life. As late as 2009, I became the first African American to get a PhD in philosophy from the University of South Carolina. But I said 2009. Okay. And when they told me, when I started my coursework, and I was told that, I said, but this is 2000. I don't care what it is. You're going to be the part. But then I thought about it. The program had only been started in 1998. And how many Black philosophers do you know? Okay. And so, and then I was chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies here at Coastal. I was co-founder of Women and Gender Studies. And I do want to tell that story real quickly to tell you how, again, I'm saying this to tell you how resistance can work for you if you know what it is. A student came to me one day and said, why don't we have women's studies here? And I cannot stand to be asked a question because I'm gonna have to find an answer. And so I wrote the question down on a note card and I kept it on my desk so I could see it. And one Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at home and I pulled out the college bulletin. What does that tell you about my social life? And I read the bulletin to see what courses were already being offered that we could make into a minor. And the rest is history. People were saying, oh, you're going to need to do focus groups. I said, okay. And I started focusing, and a year later, we had to go. So I didn't have time for that. We had to make this happen. So that's been kind of the story of my life, and even in those situations in school. And really, I still don't think we are good representatives, but because we faced what we had to face, we did what we had to do, and we didn't do that thinking we were being first and doing something. We were teenagers. We were achievers, probably overachievers, really. But we were achievers. We were taught that way by our parents. So we didn't mind working to achieve whatever it was we wanted to achieve. So it wasn't about, oh, I'm the first time. Those things came later as people started recognizing it. And then now to tell the ugly part of the story too. Don't think that all Black people wanted us going to county. They did not. As a matter of fact, there was a teacher, an African-American teacher, who told somebody she hoped we would fail. Okay. So resistance comes from all levels and all places. But that is not reason to stop. I rarely tell my age. Usually I'm 56. But today, 56 plus shouldn't happen. But today I'm going to tell you, I just completed my 74th solar return. But what I want you to know is I'm just getting started. I teach daily. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And my friends we share that age. I don't know how to do that. We need a younger person. No, we need somebody who can do it, and I can't.
You know who that person was.
Oh, who?
That said.
You.
And then he outed me on Facebook and told me on Facebook.
So,
We are coming to the end, but before we do that, I definitely want to have just a few moments to open up the floor for questions. So what I'd like to do, if we could do like a lightning round, so like 30 seconds or less, which is horrible because it's going to be a really difficult question. You all talked about, your experience, and one thing I heard acutely in different ways is this idea that while you were doing this, you were looking for opportunity. You were looking for opportunity.
right.
And if we look at what's happening now, thinking about the legacy of Brown, what is being lost is opportunity, right? We know from the data, we know that, and when we look at it, particularly across race and socioeconomic status, African-American kids, low-income children less likely to have access to AP courses, increased suspensions, the school to prison pipeline, and underfunding for the schools for African-American students, understanding that we're living in a world, as you all said, that is becoming much more brown. So I would love, again, we could probably spend a whole nother hour on this, but a rapid round, how do we live up to the legacy of Brown? Understanding that we never got to that end point, but now we're slipping. We're going in the opposite direction. What do you suggest? What do you think we could do to move us forward, to actually fulfill the legacy of Brown?
That's very difficult because, when I retired from coastal in 2018, I would have taught longer. But when the students began to cut and paste, and I was an English teacher, and I was looking for inner thoughts and ideas, and I'm teaching novels and wanting to look at different ways, and I saw that all I was getting was internet answers. I lost my fervor for teaching. Because that's not teaching, that's receiving. And so, when I look at, you ask me the questions, two things I want to say as we close out. My mother came up to Whittemore in 1942, living in the house of her ex-slave grandmother and on Brooklyn Plantation. I was just one generation away from being raised on the plantation grounds. Preston talking about time. This is when I went to Conway High in 1966. My predecessor, one that's behind me is my mother, who came here on plantation grounds. So I didn't have the story of the, my mother was a maid. She cleaned, she did what you call day labor, day's work. She worked, when you did day's work, every day had a different boss lady. Monday you working for Miss So-and-so, Tuesday Miss So-and-so, Wednesday. So when they said they did day's work, and when I got ready to go to college and had to do my financial aid, they said, your mother made $5,000 last year. Whose mother? Yes, that was her total income. How did I live through $5,000 a year? Was the question for me in my head. Because, as we all know, gardens and sharing and all kinds of things. People every Saturday morning, my grandmother was in the household with me. She was the oldest one that came up from Brooklyn. And so every Saturday morning, people from Merle's Inlet would come to Conway to bring her all of the things, because she's a senior by this time, all of the things that she needed: clams, oysters, shrimp, fish. Huh? But I really was. But the thing is, I'm trying to say is that when we're looking at time as whether it's linear or not, you really are looking at recent history here. How can I be one generation away from plantation? But when I came to Conway High, when I came to Whittemore, when my mother came, she graduated valedictorian. Back to what all of us have been saying, there was a need and a desire to be and to do. So I wanted to put that in there because her legacy is part of my legacy. And it's what made me who I am for her to say, you're going to college, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, because we didn't have an opportunity. And they still call themselves Brooklyn people. Brooklyn people didn't have the opportunity. But you're going to do it, so I'm going to do it.
So I think what I can do, what each of us can do, is to make a personal commitment. So I retired after 30 years in the same building at my alma mater at Myrtle Beach High School. I retired Monday night, July 31st at 8:03 p.m. Yeah. And I started the next morning, Tuesday, August 1st at 11:00 a.m. with the City of Myrtle Beach as Director of Neighborhood Services after I presented a scholarship. For the first 6 months, I was sick. I missed school terribly because I could do it with my eyes closed. And then I got an email from a gentleman talking about reading buddies. Is that my timer or something? Talking about reading buddies and volunteering to help our children who needed support academically and some of them socially. When I walked into that building, it became all right. First of all, I identified the neighborhoods, homes, church, and school. But when I walked into that building, everything became relevant. My oldest two reading buddies are now in 6th and 7th grade. And I started with them when they were in 2nd and 3rd grade. Then COVID happened, shut everything down, but we've reconnected, and I now have 2 more in 1st and 2nd grade. My point. Nothing's gonna get done if we're just sitting idly by and watching and talking. We know some of our children are in trouble, and as a result of COVID, it's become even more so of an issue. And so to whom much is given, much is required, much is expected. We gotta get in there and not just help the children, that's primary, but we gotta help our teachers, our educators. Because they too have suffered greatly. They've gone through a lot. So I think it's necessary. If you have the time, at primary where I serve, they only ask for 30 minutes per kid.
Yeah, I gotta get off this.
I need the academic, and I have one smart kid. As she can be, reminds me of myself. Class in 1968 said, my name is gonna be a teacher. And 14 years. So I just think we have a responsibility to get back. There's some crazy stuff going on with the
Oh my god.
nationally, locally, district. We have a responsibility.
Oh, that's what I know.
We
It's
created
secure,
code
stupid,
6.
easy.
So reading buddies, going to the school board meetings, accompanying parents who may not understand the language, all of those things that make community. And the last thing that I want to share,
Would it be a boy?
I am inviting each of you to the historic Myrtle Beach Color School Museum and Education Center, the place where we use our voices to tell the stories of our ancestors, former students, and those 9 committee members who worked for over 20 years to have this building become a reality. Oh, the story is told here. And there's more to learn. But it wasn't just African American people. We had allies, as we're supposed to be for all of our children, for all of our people. There are brochures. I'd like for you to take one. Please come and let us share the story. This is the way we teach. This is the way we keep it going. This is the way we have made our commitment on a daily basis.
In terms of what can be done, I have 2 great opportunities for you. In keeping with the legacy of Ella Baker, our church, Palmetto Missionary Baptist Church, and our mission and outreach arm, Palmetto Works Community Development Corporation, will be bringing to Conway this summer the first Children's Defense Fund Freedom School. What we are doing with 30 children this summer is instilling in them that they can make a difference. You're also trying to instill in them the joy of living, joy of living, and the love of reading. We're not necessarily teaching reading skills. We're teaching the joy and the love of reading. So the opportunity that you have is to come and be one of our readers. One of the 24 mornings that we will have the children. You have one more slot for a paid position, of a servant leader intern that has to be a person between the age of 18 and 30 who has at least 1 year of college. And for those of you who know me, you know that it costs $30,000 to put on this quality 6-week program. So I'm asking 30 of my closest friends to give me or raise me $1,000. So that is an opportunity for you. Come and be a part of the Children's Defense Fund Freedom School sponsored by Palmetto Works. The second is, in our community, we have the Whittemore Race Path Historical Society that was formed in an effort to save the history of an equalization school that was built in 1954 by Governor Burns to thwart integration, as they say, to thwart segregation, to make a workaround Brown versus Board of Education. Our effort to save the physical building has failed, but our effort to preserve the history and the spirit of what was on that site has not failed.